This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Joining me today to talk about Star Wars Ronin, a Visions novel, is the author herself, Emma Mieko Candon. Emma, welcome to Coffee with Kenobi.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, wonderful. It's such a pleasure to chat with you. Your book, we talked very briefly before the show, your book is, well, it's wonderful. The prose is dynamite. Of course, you've got this wonderful canvas of Star Wars to play with, so I'm very excited to pick your brain. Let's go ahead and start with, let me know about your Star Wars fandom and how you first fell in love with this franchise.
Well, first of all, thank you for the compliments. I'm eternally gratified that people are enjoying a book that I so enjoyed putting together. I first tripped into Star Wars when I was about 7. I was on vacation with my family or with another family. We're in a cabin by a river. There's a tiny dinky little television, and on the tiny dinky little television, there's a man hanging upside down in an ice cave, and there's a Yeti. And I'm like, what's happening? I wasn't thinking, I was just entranced, and I could not peel myself away. So I think it was the movie marathon. So I ended up watching Empire Strikes Back and then Return of the Jedi. And then at some point after that, I'm sure I watched A New Hope fairly soon after. And then within a month, I'm in the library reading every, what's now the Legends book I can find. So I consumed a lot of that and every one of the 3 libraries I could reach when I was a kid. So I was deep into it from a very young age.
That might be one of my favorite answers to that question. I love that. That's so fun. Especially imagine what it must be like. I guess you don't have to imagine you lived it, but seeing this guy hanging upside down, there's this monster, and it's like, am I at the animal kingdom? That's great. That's great.
I didn't know what was going on, but I had to find out. Oh my God, there's a laser sword. What's happening?
Well, then that begs the question, does that automatically make Empire your favorite one? Because that's the first one you saw?
I think for a long time, I don't know that I got Empire because I watched it when I was really young, right? So
Sure.
we respond to these different things, and it turns out I really like beginnings and endings. So
Sure.
the last few scenes of Return of the Jedi, I adore. I love the opening half of A New Hope. And now that I'm older, I have this deep appreciation for what Empire does in the middle section. It's just so interesting. It's such a good model of how to make the middle step of a trilogy compelling in its own right. But I didn't have that sophistication when I was 7. I was just like, pew, pew, bang, bang, the teddy bears won. Hooray!
Yep. Oh, that's good. So, no, I agree. And I think I'm the same way. When I saw Empire, I was probably about the same age. And I thought, and I liked it. But the fact the way it ended was, well, anyway, we're going off script. Let's jump in. Let's we can obviously,
clearly.
Yes, exactly. See, when you're having coffee with your friends talking Star Wars, great things happen, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about anime. What makes anime different from other types of animation, and why is it such a perfect fit for Star Wars?
So I actually, funnily enough, I wrote a thread about this on Twitter the other day because I had the luck and joy of taking a post-war pop culture in Japan course when I was an undergrad. And so we talked about anime, among other things. But anime is really interesting because it's a very, very strong lineage in terms of its production. And it has particular aesthetics that it cleaves to. And it's hard, I think, to identify specifically what's anime, but people obviously have very strong opinions about whether this or that thing qualifies as anime. Like if you go on the internet and tell someone Avatar: The Last Airbender is anime, they will either go, I know, right? Or they'll go, what? Heathen. And so, like, that to me says that anime, like, has in itself sort of an identity that's very, very strong, but also, you know, it's hard to identify exactly what those features are. To me, I think a lot of it has to do with a sort of bombastic aesthetic, even though some of my personal favorite anime are actually very quiet, but just like the outlandishness of the ideas you can get away with in these stories, and the size and intensity of the emotions that are so frequently attached to them, that's very like quintessential anime. I guess it's like Greek tragedy, but animated and from Japan. And like, I think you could do some really interesting things with Greek tragedy in Star Wars, and the same things you did with Visions in Star Wars. And like, to me, it's that combination of melodrama and like high key interest in aesthetic.
What that's a great answer. And also someone else tried to explain to me that anime sometimes implies more sophisticated content or more mature
Mm,
content, but I don't know that that necessarily follows with Visions because they're all have various
yeah,
degrees of intensity, but some are much more have much more cost attributed to them than
yeah.
others.
And also, I would argue there's anime for children.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Like
you
Toby
know,
1, for example.
yeah, Toby one. Like, that's so like you can talk all day about how Astro Boy, which it's very clearly derived from, has a lot of like very deep, complex emotional explorations within it. But it's also geared to be interesting to children. And like
Mm.
there's a lot of long running anime that is explicitly for children in Japan, like Doraemon, or like, yeah, no, it's just uh anime as a genre is so broad that you can barely call it a genre, but then you kind of have to because, again, it's so clear to some people when something is not quite anime, or, and you know, other people would argue, no, it still is. It's fitting within that general box. But
Right.
again,
So
you could talk about that all day.
you could. And fortunately, we found another topic for people on the internet to get upset about. That's good.
Hooray! We'll never be bored again.
No, never. And this is why these conversations are so important because we're able to talk about and educate people about this. And speaking of educating, you and I were talking before the show about the fact that I'm an educator. And one of my favorite things about Visions overall is that it is a wonderful gateway into the world of Japanese culture,
Mm,
folklore, and mythology. So for
mm.
you, what does Visions reveal about Japanese culture and their audiences?
Yeah. So like that's I was really puzzled over like how to answer that question when I read it, because and this is going to be entirely because I did anthropology in undergrad. So if you ask me what is culture, I'll go, I don't know. What is culture? And but so because like there's patterns of consistency among groups of people, right? And those are never written in stone. There's always variation. But I think what you get a lot of in Visions as a whole, which is wonderfully like all of these instances are so completely different from each other. Like, what does Akakiri have in common with Tatooine Rhapsody? My God, I don't know. They're both in the same anthology and they're both in the same like medium genre. And I think what I would say then is that there's a lot of interest in the intimate emotional ties between individuals, accompanied by um, this really deeply embedded sense that sometimes there are things in the world that are in some way insurmountable, but it might still be worth it to push against that, especially if you're doing it in concert with someone else or for the sake of someone else.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, like, and in some of them, you see a lot of that. Like, there's a lot of uh, in pop culture in Japan and like in their literary genres, this sense of attachment to nature and the natural world, and that's almost like a literary meme in some ways because it's tied to this sense of nostalgia of a world that was lost when Japan moved back into concert with the modern world, and there's like a lot of really messy things to be drawn out from that. I feel like I have given you the messiest possible answer to this question.
No, I'm eating this up because because this is certainly an area. I mean, I have a background in a lot of different sorts of mythology, but
Mm-hmm.
my understanding of what it means for the people of Japan
Mm-hmm.
and the history of that, I'm certainly unaware of. So I think this is
Mm-hmm.
wonderful and fascinating.
Well, one of my favorite tidbits to tell you then is that Japanese folklore has a lot of ghosts, or like kind of ghosts, kind of obake. They're ghosts, they're demons. There's not a clean translation in English, but obake can be all kinds of things. They can look kind of like a person, or my favorite one is a ghost wall. And it's a wall that appears in the forest and it is always in front of you, no matter where you turn. And it's like preventing you from getting anywhere or escaping. So you'll like go down a new little path and then suddenly the wall is there and you go, oh no, the ghost wall. And you turn around and you try to escape. But no, the ghost wall's there now. It's or like a ghost can be a particular sound that the wind makes. It's just the folklore in Japan can be so whimsical. It's amazing.
I love it. I love it. Well, I certainly picked up the spiritual aspects and the spiritual vibes, especially in the Village Bride 2 with
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
power of the mountains. And
Mm-hmm.
so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, gosh, can you come on for like 5 or 6 weeks in a row? We can just explore this.
Gosh, we could absolutely spend like an hour picking over each of these episodes. They're all great. I just, oh,
Mhm. I
like
agree.
everybody has their preferences. Everybody has the one where they're like, ooh, that's the one for me. But I really just admire the artistry and the thought that went into all of them. It's so evident.
It's great. Well, I mean, while we're talking to the author of Ronin, let's talk about Star Wars Visions Ronin. How did you get involved with this project, and what was that like, both as a fan and then also as a professional writer?
So, I think it was right around this time last year when my agent said, "Hey, they're looking for Star Wars is looking for authors of Japanese ancestry. Do you want me to put your name in the hat?" And I was like, "Do you have to ask?" And she was like, "No, I'm just making sure." And there I am thinking like I've sold nothing. I don't have short stories out. I don't have books out. Like this is a shot in the dark. We'll see what happens. And I believe she sent them the first chapter and change of the uh, manuscript that I was at that point like on the verge of selling to Tor.com. And a month after I signed that deal, I was told, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And yes, I did. So that was how that happened. And it's so hard to encapsulate how surreal it is because I'm one of those people where when a big thing happens, I don't process it right away. It just like I intake the information and then I'll like be driving somewhere and go, "Oh my god, what just happened?" So there were a couple days where I would like have the sudden epiphany of like, "Oh my god, you're gonna work on a Star Wars book." Um, but like low key, one of my bucket list goals, had been like convince them to let you write one of these. So I don't know what to replace that with now that they've let me do it.
Well, the next one, of course.
Yeah, let me write another.
Wow. I mean, honestly, without any hyperbole, I love, and I said this already, but the prose is just it's so rich. And in fact, I found myself, and this is part of the challenge of being an English teacher, anyways. When I
Mm,
read, I pour over sentences and I
mhm,
wonder why a
mhm,
comma was there, and I just think about stuff. But you really had me
mhm,
thinking not only about the context of the characters, and this lore that we are sparsing out with through Visions itself, but just the way you turn a phrase, and it's obvious for people listening on the show right now. I mean, I am so glad you're in the Star Wars world, because the book, people are going to love this book. They really are.
Thank you. I'm learning how to take a compliment. It's been a gauntlet the past month.
Well,
So
it's
all I
probably
can
not
say
going to
is
stop.
very much.
Of course.
I'm genuinely glad people are enjoying it, because
yes.
I'm also actually terminally shy about my writing.
Really?
Like this book, which, I got my author copies, so I very diligently gave one to my mother, and I gave one to my friends, especially the one friend who I had been promising for years, I will let you read my stuff. And I never had. He finally got something. And just like all these friends with whom I had never shared anything because I was too terrified. And so, it's been very special to feel like, oh, you genuinely liked it. Hooray! I made you happy. I made you sad, and then I made you happy.
You not only that, but you also made me think. You made me think a lot.
Yay! My favorite.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, so when you first learn about the story of Ronin, was it something where you were able to see a rough cut of the episode, or was it more of like sort of an outline explaining what the short was going to be about?
So by the time they brought me on, I think by the end of the first day, because they only tell me the basic concept before I agree. And by the end of the first day, I think I had a copy of the original script written by Mitsuyasu Sakai, and you can find him on Twitter. He sometimes tweets in English. And then I was also very quickly after that shown a very early rough draft of the short. And there are differences between them. And like in the script, the Ronin's actually a bit more talkative, but he's not a chatterbox, but he's cracking wise more often, and he's very much more taciturn in the short. And I just took those jokes and I was like, no, we're going to keep them, because some of the jokes from that script are in the book, because I was like, no, that's very funny and it should stay. But it definitely was part of how I developed his character from the start, because it's harder for me to write someone who isn't able to have like fun times, at least in their head, even if they're not, going haha to other people. I need them to at least have some commentary going on. And it was perfect, because there it is. There he is, this big grim man with a kind of very understated wry sense of humor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very, very kind of a pithy approach. Well, so then so while we're certainly not going to spoil anything about the novel, we're very anti-spoiler here, but we will be discussing some important aspects of the book. Let's go ahead and talk about the protagonist, the Ronin himself. What makes him so unique and dynamic in the Star Wars universe?
I think a good chunk of this has to come from the fact that he's older than the average Star Wars protagonist. He's lived a whole life, and he's not proud of all of it. In fact, there's a good chunk that he had some problems with, and that's catching up to him. And I think probably the character you could liken him most to, in the cinematic universe at least, would probably be the place where Luke is in Last Jedi, where he's just he's so tired. He's so unmoored by himself and the things he's carrying. And he's not the protagonist of that movie, but what's going on with him is very much a fulcrum of everything else that happens. And in this book, it's here's a guy, he's done some stuff. We'll find out what.
I love that. See, initially, I always tend to go, of course, Coffee with Kenobi. You can't help but think of Mr. Alec Guinness' version of Obi-Wan Kenobi. But I also kind of feel like the Ronin and Qui-Gon Jinn. I'd love to see those two have a
Yeah.
conversation with
Oh
one
gosh,
another.
me too. That'd be amazing. You've just reminded me that one of my first like mental touchstones for him was uh if Anakin Skywalker had pulled an Obi-Wan Kenobi, where it's like, here's a man who's clearly done something.
Mhm.
We don't know what, but he went, okay, bye now.
That's an awesome one. I hadn't thought about that, but that's a good one because you can kind of I could see some interesting parallels, not of course in the story
Yeah,
per se,
no, that
but sort of in
I don't want to say anything more, but that was just like a
right.
broad sense of like, all right,
Yes.
how are you going to write this man? Who is he? How does he feel?
Mhm. Well, it was daunting for sure. That's I love that. That's so cool. So again, we're not going to spoil anything, but
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about the unique internal dialogue of the Ronin as far as the narrative
Mm-hmm.
approach and how it helps
Mm-hmm.
us learn more about the character.
Yeah. So again, without spoiling anything, I think what you're talking about was actually something that uh, the editorial team suggested, and I just
Mm,
immediately glommed onto it. Like, this is brilliant. This mechanic is going to do so much
mhm,
because again, he's just not a very talkative guy. He's carrying a lot of secrets that he doesn't want other people to have, that he barely wants to have himself. So he's not going to go around going, "Hey, here's my backstory." um, so just like having a way to dig more into him and to like push those buttons, even when he's doing his best to not even let anybody know that he has buttons to be pushed.
mhm.
So yeah, it was just like so much a factor of like, here's a guy who doesn't want to talk. How are you going to force him to?
Right, because you don't want to be like that first person, like old school gumshoe detective where he's like,
Mm-hmm.
and there I was walking down the alley. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was, I thought it was a really cool, sort of a refreshing approach because sometimes when you have a loner like this, if you just got a droid to that's a little persnickety
Mm-hmm.
to kind of bounce out ideas off of, yeah, that's good. Yeah, we definitely don't want to spoil anything, but yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
be on the lookout for
Yeah.
that, friends, because it's
I
well worth it.
Something else that was important to me that I took away from the script is that he's able to talk to just like people, like a person.
Mhm,
Like
mhm.
in the short, you see him interacting with the owner of a tea shop, and it's just he's just hanging out with the guy.
Yeah,
And they're like, okay, this is a man who knows how to interact with like the people who aren't space wizards. And I
right.
kept that in mind while I was writing him.
So speaking of space wizards, but in a very different
Mm.
way, we've got sort of the Funhouse Mirror version. When the
Yes,
Sith Bandit, as she is initially called,
yes.
describes her connection to the Force. This was one of my favorite parts of the entire book.
Uh huh.
It's explained as white flare, while later in the book, white flare
Hmm.
and black current. Now, again, the English
Hmm.
teacher's symbolism jumps out here. Talk about the decision here as well as the symbolism surrounding that current.
So that's very much just me. A lot of Ronin comes from the fact that Kamikaze Doga, the studio, decided to lean real hard into Jidaigeki, which is the period pieces from which Star Wars A New Hope was itself originally inspired. Like, that's sort of the famous lineage. So they're like, okay, we're going to go all the way back there. And so for me, it was kind of like moving the story sort of back and forth between those two polarities, like pulling everything in Star Wars a little bit closer to Jidaigeki. And every once in a while, the editorial team would be like, that's a little too far. Can we come back a little closer to Star Wars? And so, like, that was where we were going. But one of the things in the midst of that is like, okay, well, what are you going to do with the Force? Because the Force is like pretty clearly, I think most people know, it's chi, right? It's some
Mhm.
iteration on that understanding of the world, on that belief of the world, which is itself rooted in Taoism from China. And, you know, the way that came over to Japan as well, where it's, you know, you'll hear references to both chi and to ki. Um, But in Taoism, you also have the understanding of yin and yang. So, which again, I'm pretty sure, like, I would not be shocked if that's part of what evolved into the light side and the dark side, right? Which are themselves a little more aligned with what I would call like a Judeo-Christian sort of, thus big Zarathustra understanding of the world, good and evil, light and dark. And it's not, you can't do that analogy quite as easily in Japanese folklore, especially when you're like pulling it closer to chi. And there you have a light, but the light is also heat, and it is aggression, it is the sun, it is force, and that's yang. And then you have yin, which is darkness, it's black, it's the moon, it's water, it's passivity. And these things are both in the world. And, like some of the medicinal practice involved in this is like, oh, well, you have too much yin energy or you have too much yang energy. And like, this is a way to find balance. You should eat these foods. They have yang in them. So like, it's not Taoism by any means what's going on in Ronin. Just like pulling all of that, like what the force is, back into a context where it's like a little more legible in the more Japanese setting and inspirations. So when it came to having, this character who is so aggressive and clearly so convinced of herself, that to me just reeked yang energy. Like, okay, white flare for this lady. What does that mean? And like, definitely the way I also posed it in this world is that there's no sense of like, one of these is verboten. You should not use that one. It is giving into something. Because it's like, no, everyone's got their affinities and everybody uses them in different ways. And you can cultivate your affinity, or you can like pursue something you're not as naturally inclined to or whatever. And sometimes you're just the Sith bandit who's like all fire, all passion, all the time. It's just where she is.
Wow, you've given me a lot more to think about. You've given me a lot more to think about. That's interesting because so are we allowed to say the name of the character? Or should we just refer to her as the Sith bandit?
I am so this has been a fun line to walk in interviews. At this point, because the 5 chapters are out on the internet, and I know a lot of people are like, no, I must not read them. But because they're out there and they're floating around, I have made an exception for her name, at least. Like, I've not said anything in any public spaces about the rest, except extremely vague jokes.
We can stick with that, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So Kodu. I named her Kodu. And
a beautiful
I love
name.
her.
Is there a meaning behind? Is there a meaning behind that name?
I'm very bad with names. My editor Tom very early on was like, find people in your life and name Star Wars things after them. So Kodu was one of the first, and I named her after my wife, who is Nicole. And Nikoru is what she was called when she was working in Japan. So Koru. And
I love it.
My wife is much more patient than Koru.
Not so much with the white flare.
No. Well, I mean, like I'd call her a different kind of that probably.
Right.
But yeah.
Oh, that's neat. That's really neat. Well, I mean, this character is a fascinating force of nature. For you, what is compelling about her, and what does she teach the reader about the many aspects of the Force? Because I do think there's something there.
Yeah. So I have had to think a lot about why I'm so drawn to scary Sith ladies. But as soon as I saw the duel, I was like, oh my God, I need to keep her. I can't let her go. Whatever's going on here, I need to figure this out. And like in a very pithy way, I'd say it's probably because they're allowed to be very, very rude. And I think that's very fun. It's you know, like however much people push back in places, we still have our most common archetypes that are still like much more dominant in various forms of literature and pop culture and whatever. And the idea of a very aggressive woman is still less common than not, like to the point where it's kind of important to do more with that. And she's not only an aggressive woman, she's just not a very nice one.
It's true.
But at the same time, I hope that what people find about her as they read her and learn more about her is they see the pathos in her situation and feel a lot of where that deep anger is rooted in legitimate injustices that she has suffered. And consequently, it was very important to me that she have POV and that this book also be her book, because she's, you know, by far and away the person with the most narrative space and time is the Ronin. But one of the other people with POV is Koru. And one of the things I really love about Jidaigeki as a genre is it's very disinterested in like good and evil, in the sense that it loves when neither of those apply. He gets very excited when a situation is too complicated for anyone to be completely right. And so she's here in that respect. Like, she starts out like terrorizing a village. That's not a good person thing to do. You shouldn't do that. But a thing I was thinking of was like, I still forget who said this. It was a guy who ended up being part of, I think, Chairman Mao's government during the Cultural Revolution in China. But he was a bandit before he was a politician. And there's something he says about like, bandits are made by politics. Bandits are made by the times. A bandit is a consequence of a world that is broken. So that was what I was thinking about when I was trying to figure out who she was going to be in this story.
Let's take a quick break and return with more from Mieko Candon. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
With travel beginning to open up and Walt Disney World and Disneyland reaching full capacity, this is the time to book your Disney World vacation with MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. Their signature service and expert advice will help clients maximize their vacation, time, and dollar. I use Becky Menken and MEI's incredible services all the time, both for family and for travel for the show, because of their no cost, no obligation quote when you use the service. Plus, they proactively adjust a booking if the rate goes down. Literally, I will wake up one morning and I will get an email from MEI saying that the price went down, and I will get a refund sent to my credit card right away. I don't have to do anything. They help your family enjoy everything Galaxy's Edge and the Disney theme parks and the cruise lines have to offer. Can help you plan every detail and always share invaluable tips. That's for Walt Disney World, Disneyland, the Disney Cruise Lines, or other cruise lines. It doesn't have to be Disney related. They literally can help you plan a vacation anywhere on the planet. Be sure to go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel and sign up for a free no obligation quote to any of the Disney theme parks on the planet or any vacation that you have in mind. You'll have the best vacation possible and help out me and Coffee with Kenobi in the process. And actually, that's one of the things, like, sometimes in novels, you're not sure what characters you want to spend more time with. I found myself equally enjoying spending time with both of them because I like that she wasn't just some one-trick pony, a flat character. You've given her she's much more dynamic. And I think that motivation makes it kind of Shakespearean in a way, which is is really, to me, that's what it's all about. When you create a scenario where while you don't necessarily empathize, the pathos that you mentioned before
Mm-hmm.
is clearly a part of what invests you in this character. And then when
Mm-hmm.
I've rewatched the short since I've read your book, and now
Mm-hmm.
it's like I look at it so much differently now.
Well, let's be clear. She's a jerk in that short.
Oh, of course, you start to get it. Yeah, no,
Yes.
she's
Yeah.
not going to be babysitting anytime soon. But
Right.
yeah,
No.
she's not.
Oh, don't.
But
Don't do that.
no, no chance, no way. But yeah, but you start to understand the
Mhm,
dynamics that are certainly at play there.
mhm,
Another thing about the book that I like is a lot of the first half of the book, especially, reminds me of an allegory, primarily because of the
mm,
characters' names. Now,
mm,
I was thinking of Pilgrim's Progress because that's sort of the classic
mhm,
allegory,
mhm,
but was that a
mhm.
conscious decision? Or was that more of an
So
organic part of the storytelling?
that evolved out of the fact that early on, like one of the directives I got from the studio down to me was he's just the Ronin. He doesn't have a name. And um, I probably could have gotten away with naming him somewhere in the book, but I decided very early on that I wasn't going to, that he
Mhm.
was, and like that's partially because his relationship to whatever his name was, which I don't know what it was. I never figured it out. It's not.
Right.
It's very fraught, and it's also again sort of like a pressure point inside him all the time.
Mhm.
He's not that. He has tried to forsake that, even though it's not going to let him in a lot of ways. But as a consequence, when I first turned in the outline, because as I mentioned, I'm bad at names, nobody had a name. And um, they apparently talked amongst themselves like, is she going to name them? Is she? Or is it just going to be this? Like the Ronin, the bandit, the da 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 da.
Right.
And like, no, 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 I'm going to name them. This one, probably not, but everybody else. Because again, there's like, no spoilers, the fact that people can have names or choose to eschew them is a recurring element of the story and the way it's being told. And it all began with this early studio decision of like, no, he does not have one. And so, like, in that way, every time there is a name or there is an absence of one or there's some sort of tension around a name, that's all very intentionally reflecting back on him because like they're characters, but they're also like part of a larger story and a tapestry that's all like trying to be coherent.
Right, and it also adds to the sort of the ambiguity of that. The fact that we don't ever find that out, I
Mm-hmm.
think, adds to the power of and the mystery of the Ronin
Mm-hmm.
himself. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you get through the whole book and all of a sudden you find out his name's Henry or something, it just doesn't feel the same way, right?
No.
There's I think there's power in that,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and and I also like the idea of him sort of running from that, and we are
Mm-hmm.
running from that too because we don't get to see it. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a powerful
Mm-hmm.
hook.
Yes. Yep.
So yeah, so interesting. Sorry, I break into teacher mode sometimes. It's going to happen
No,
on
I love
occasion.
it. I love it.
Thank
Pedagogy.
you.
Yay.
That's right, pedagogy. Yeah, exactly. So we talk about this a lot in my mythology courses,
Mm.
good and evil and stories and how they show up or how they don't show up as we're talking
Mhm.
about.
Mhm.
But what is different about the classic struggle of good versus evil in Ronin that is different from what we are used to in the Star Wars mythology overall?
So yeah, so like I was saying, like in Jidaigeki, what they're really not interested in telling a story where there is like a good or a evil or even like multiple interpretations of good and multiple interpretations of evil. Except yes, kind of that. It's not framed, I would say, in such diametric terms, so much
Mhm.
as and I feel like I've talked about this somewhere before, but just like this guy that they gave me as the protagonist, he's the Ronin, right? And he's also, we learn by the end, a Sith. And that signals to us, okay, a bad guy. And so when I was trying to figure out, like, all right, well, who's he going to be in the vocabulary of this genre? Jidaigeki often really, really like this classic samurai hero who's a samurai. So he's been granted the authority, the moral authority, to have a sword and to wield it, and to do that in service of the greater structure that he is part of. And also somewhat in service to himself, because I don't think that's ever really absent in these studies that these movies are interested in doing, where they're like, yes, the man of authority and power is doing this for the greater good, but he's also doing it so he knows that he's good. Because that classic samurai hero is often wrestling with a thing he's done, where he's like, uh-oh, I killed peasants because my lord told me to. How do I feel about that? Not so good. And then he's struggling with that for the rest of the movie, and you see all the consequences of it. You know, like, you'll see the bereaved that the peasants have left behind, and you'll see the lord, or like the daughter of the lord, and like she's actually like really naively very good, but like maybe that naivete can't survive. And you know, you have all these different characters who are in this situation. You build up a lot of empathy for them because they're all trying to do something that they think is good, but maybe they've made some mistakes, and maybe they're bound to make mistakes again. So yeah, that's what you get here, or that's what I was aiming for.
Right, and I like that, because again, I hope it gets people to explore more stories like this, and the notion of nuance, it's much more interesting to me. Speaking of interesting, I really like what you did in the book with kyber crystals in this world, and talk
Oh.
about these kyber crystals and their importance in Ronin.
Okay, so part of this is also the beginning is a studio directive, because you know, you see in the short, all right, this guy's collecting them. Specifically, they're all red. That's interesting. What does that mean? And furthermore, the other detail I got from the studio was the Empire has made crystals illegal. You cannot have them. You are not allowed to have them unless presumably you are a member of the state. And again, Tom and the editor and I had some back and forth about this, and we're like, oh, okay. So this is analogous to the sword laws that they had at some periods of, I think during the shogunate in Japan, where they were like, nobody can have a sword except for the samurai. If you have a sword, it will be taken from you and you will be penalized, possibly by death. And they are just going to take all those swords and junk them or like redistribute them, but like very tightly controlled over who gets to have that power. And you know, because of the time period, that's clearly what they're kind of like leaning toward with these kyber. And I was like, okay, so we'll just go with that. And the extrapolation of that for me was that whenever there is an authoritarian edict like that, the people who suffer most are the ones who have the least power to resist it. And in the case of a thing where we're talking about kyber, we're not talking about something that is in itself a weapon. We're talking about something that in the lore is a thing that is an object but has a sort of aliveness to it. It has a resonance in the force. It's like has a spiritual quality. So it made a lot of sense to me then that for some people it would not have the meaning of, oh, you put that in a hilt and it turns into a sword that you can do sword things with. Like, no, that's not what everybody thinks about them. Some people have a very different relationship to it. And if they're not allowed to have it, they are suffering in some of the most human ways imaginable to suffer, you know, like a deprivation of something through which you have connection not only to the universe but to other people. Yeah, so that was a union of the history as that Jidaigeki are also drawing from Japanese history, and the pre-established lore of Star Wars, because there's no kyber crystals in Japanese folklore. It's all like
Right.
reinterpreting that into this context.
Right, and it's got a kind of a neat little spiritual aspect of it as well, like
Mhm.
maybe I don't know if it's spiritual or mystical, but
Mhm.
it's there.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, the other thing that I think I was trying to do with the way that the Force exists and is thought of and approached in this version of a Star Wars universe is that it's largely not regarded as just a thing that Jedi do. It's a thing that everybody has some kind of interaction with. Some
Mm,
people are less given to interacting with it. They're like, yeah, whatever, that's stuff. Like, I'm not religious. Or other people will be like, yes, I'm religious, but I don't think about this Force stuff at all. That's whatever. Like, I have my own way of interpreting my place in the world. But yeah, that was something I really wanted to do where, it's not just like, and it made sense because I think that that's even there just in the blurbs, but like if the Jedi are the state, then the Force is just a thing people know about.
right.
Yeah.
Right. It was, yeah. It's gonna. I'm really interested when people read this when it comes out. I can't wait to hear some of the conversation and dialogue because there's a lot to
Me
break down.
too.
Oh, I bet. I bet. So finally, what other shorts from Star Wars Visions resonated with you? I'm sure there were a few that you saw and you thought, "Ooh, that'd be fun to write about."
Oh gosh, yeah. So the one in the trailers that I knew immediately was going to be like, all right, so that one is for fans like me. That like I gravitate toward the kind of anime that is, and it absolutely was this because I spent the whole time just having chills watching it. Was The Village Bride? It's
My favorite one, honestly,
yeah,
my favorite one.
it's just the way it uses sound and tapestry of world and
Mhm.
the conversations can be so spare, but they communicate so much. Like they're skipping over so much like dialogue in order to give you the real meat of the moment. And oh, it has my heart the entire time. It's just like holding me in its hands. I love it. Um, but the one that like caught me by surprise, and I thought it was really, really skillfully done, was Akakiri, which I like it when things make me feel bad, and I know not everybody likes that, but I often enjoy that. This one made me
This
feel
one did
real
it.
bad.
Yeah.
But I also think so. I work in editing for a company that publishes manga and light novels. So I've begun to pay more attention to contemporary anime, like far more than I have in the past decade. And but so much comes out every season that like I can't be bothered to watch everything. But what I'm looking for a lot of the time is something that's really making its animation pull a lot of the weight of the storytelling. Like
Mhm.
that's how I know like okay, I'm really going to enjoy this. And one of the studios that did something that absolutely did that to me last year, or maybe the year before, knocked it out of the park with Keep Your Hands Off Hazelken, which is just amazing. It's really, really good. But they also did Akakiri, and it's like, yes, you absolutely had the ability to do this. Like Keep Your Hands Off Hazelken is about three high school girls who decide to make an anime, and it's just so inventive and crazy with the things that they pull off with their animation and just like yes, these are the people who could do that.
That's so cool, and a frightening villain too.
God,
Like evil for
scary,
the sake
loved
of
it.
evil at least feels that way
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah. And okay, one of my favorite things is when they sort of analogize evil to destiny itself. It's like that's the
Yes.
inescapable primordial terror at the heart of this all. And it's like, yeah, that's terrifying. I loved it.
And yeah, that I think that adds. I think you're right. That totally boosts the kind of the fear factor of the
Hmm.
piece because
Hmm.
it sort of it clearly shakes them to the core about what to believe. Yeah. Wow. See,
Yeah,
this is
I loved
why.
it.
Oh, it's so good. There's just so many. And as a side note, and not related to anything we've talked about, but
Yeah.
how great is that song on Tatooine Rhapsody?
It's so joyful.
It's so catchy.
It's
Yes, it
God,
is.
it's the thing I've said about it online is like it has a lot of gambare attitude, which is gambate is what people will say to like do your best, and it's a refrain that you'll get in like these shonen anime that are more directed to like young kids, especially boys. But it's like that's the energy you've got. Like I love
It works. Yeah, it totally works.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is... yes.
As we near the end of the show today, I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to have a cup of coffee with me and for helping to spread the word about our Star Wars family we've got here at Coffee with Kenobi. Be sure to tune in Monday nights at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook Live at www.coffeewithkenobi.com/live or www.facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi and have a cup of coffee, tea, or any beverage of your choosing with me as we continue the conversation. To join us in the CWK Cafe, which is our Facebook group, and share your Star Wars thoughts, comments, reviews, and opinions in a family-friendly, spoiler-free place that is also drama-free, go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/community and be part of the conversation, talk about this week's show, or just talk about some Star Wars. We have a lot of fun and you'll make some new friends as well as catch up with longtime friends along the way. I also want to thank all of the new and longtime members of the CWK Alliance and let you know how much I appreciate your help and encouragement. If you want to join the CWK Alliance, go to www.cwkalliance.com and sign up today. Not only will you help out Coffee with Kenobi, but you also get access to CWK Pour-Over, the exclusive weekly podcast not heard anywhere else. It's a great way to support and help out the show, and 10% of your monthly contributions go directly to the St. Jude Children's Hospital to support the incredibly important work they are doing to help these brave children and their families. Plus, contributors at the CWK All-Star level can watch a video podcast of CWK Pour-Over hosted by me, Tom Gross, and Corey Clubb. Feel free to reach out anytime if you have any questions. In addition to being part of the community on Facebook, please don't forget to visit our website at www.coffeewithkenobi.com for Star Wars news, announcements, reviews, videos, and so much more. If you have a question for me or just want to share your thoughts on the air, feel free to email me at danz@coffeewithkenobi.com and I'll share them on the show. You can also connect with me on Twitter at Mr. Zaire, MRZEHR, or on Instagram at DanZareCWK. There are also a lot more ways to connect with me and Coffee with Kenobi on social media. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Give us a like on Facebook at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi. Check us out on Pinterest or subscribe to our Coffee with Kenobi YouTube channel. On our YouTube channel, you can find Facebook Live video, different interviews throughout the years, highlights of video coverage throughout the Coffee with Kenobi history, and the audio podcast itself. You can order my book, The Star Wars Book, which I co-wrote with Lucasfilm's Pablo Hidalgo and Cole Horton, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, Books A Million, Walmart, or anywhere books are sold. You can also find my writing on Coffee with Kenobi's website, as well as StarWars.com, where I am an official blogger there, and on IGN, where I contribute occasionally to articles about Star Wars, as well as other popular culture topics. If you are considering starting a podcast or a blog, let me know how I can help you get started and make your creative vision a reality. Be sure to check out danzmedia.com and we can get the process started. I am also available to come to your school, conference, business, or organization to talk about how to tap into your strengths and help you bring out your very best. I want to inspire you to be inspired so you can take that first step into a larger world. Thanks as always to our Coffee with Kenobi sponsors, especially MEI and Mouse Fan Travel, our travel partner and your one-stop shop for all things Walt Disney World, Disneyland, the Disney Cruise Lines, or anywhere on the planet you want to go on your vacation. please go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel to book your magical vacation and help support Coffee with Kenobi in the process. If you like the show, please tweet out that you're listening, share it on Facebook, or invite your friends and family to tune in and share a cup of coffee with us. And if the Force is especially with you, please take a couple of minutes to rate and review the show on iTunes or Google Podcasts. Every review makes a huge difference and helps to spread the word, and I can't thank you enough for your help, for your support, and your friendship. I love so much being a part of this wonderful Star Wars community, and I can't thank you enough for all that you do for me and Coffee with Kenobi. Well, Emma, it's been an absolute delight to pick your brain and hear you explain a lot of the impetus of Ronin and about Japanese culture. So thank you so much for being on Coffee with Kenobi. Where can people reach out to you if they want to continue the conversation, and when can we find the book?
Well, thank you so much again for having me. It was just an absolute delight. I sensed we could literally talk for hours, but
yes.
I am going to let people know where they can talk with me for hours. That's I'm kind of sporadically on social media, but I'm mostly on Twitter, where you can find me at EMMACANDON, Emma Candon. I'm trying to bully myself into starting a newsletter where I can actually write about things at length, because I feel like there's a lot of stuff to talk about with Ronin. And,
yes.
So keep an eye out for that. I'm theoretically also on Instagram and Tumblr under EM Candon, so EMCANDON. And yeah, the book you can find on October 12th, and I hope you enjoy it.
And so, and you've also got something coming out, I believe, through Nerdist, and Matt Martin is going to be joining you. Oh
yeah, no, we're doing a release stream eve, or a stream on release eve. So October 11th on Nerdist, on the Nerdist YouTube channel. I'll be hanging out with Matt Martin from the Story Group and Tom Holler, my editor. And I've had a preview of some of the in-jokes we'll be cracking. So I'm very excited about that. They're great people. That editorial team was just amazing.
They are great. Matt is actually a good buddy of mine. And I'm excited for this. Well, Emma Candon, thanks again so much for being on Coffee with Kenobi. You're welcome back anytime.
Oh, wonderful, Lizzie. I'd be happy to be here.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.